Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Bengal Tiger Recruiting Podcast. I am Billy Embody. With me, Shea Dixon, to break it all down this week. We are back fresh off an LSU win at Florida. I was with my brother-in-law this weekend who went to Florida, and let me tell you, it was a tough evening for him watching that one in the back of a wedding. So, look, Shea, a lot of momentum for LSU after this one. You got Ole Miss coming in at 2:30. Starting to be fall. Everything's going right now.
It's hoodie weather. Yeah, it's like 50 something degrees in Baton Rouge today. Tomorrow is supposed to be like 39 at some point. I don't know. Is
Yeah,
Dallas even colder than that?
yeah. It's supposed to be about 36 tomorrow morning. So we've ditched the summer weather. It seems like.
No complaints. Hey, the corny segue there. You know it's actually red hot though. LSU football recruiting, or at least the team right now, coming off of a win.
Everybody wants to know what's going on, what's next. You know, it's crazy, the ups and downs of a season. Everything's falling apart. Could it spiral? Could it affect recruits? Well, look, recruits got it the best. They don't, go up and down like fans do, and not calling fans irrational, but make irrational decisions for their futures based off one game. If they did, LSU would be flipping all three, the top quarterbacks in the country after beating Florida like that. And certainly would have a number one recruiting class right now if they had all left the Gators class, come on over to LSU. So look, we know there's some momentum back behind LSU now. It's a big recruiting weekend. We're going to have a huge visitor list, we feel like, to share with you guys on the BengalTiger.com, which, by the way, still people are just finding out about the dollar for the year. And you get the hat. We've had two people on the board just today go, wait a second, I get a hat?
Yeah, I don't know. Matty B does a good job of selling the hat on the podcast. I don't have it right in front of me though. He usually pulls it out and reveals it. But yes, or some people, I would just think the hat's worth the dollar. And then you get a free year of VIP, On3 Plus membership behind the paywall to everything on the site, including us. So don't let us down. It's worth it. I've had a couple of people say they joined after listening to the podcast. So maybe they are stacking them up. We're trying to build a big community here.
We're getting through to people, and look, LSU is gotten through to a few recruits that are going to be on campus this weekend. It's kind of going to be a nice reunion for some of these commits who haven't been back in a minute. Let's lead off with one, and then we'll kind of get into some rankings talk. But DeSean Womack, the guy that we have at On3 as a 5-star. If the rankings ended today, LSU would have Shelton Sampson, Zalance Hurd, and DeSean Womack as its 5-stars in the class of 2023. He's having a huge senior year for St. Francis. He's one of the big visitors that's going to be on campus. And look, I mean, anytime you can get your commits, especially the highly touted ones, back on campus, that just continues to help build these relationships and these bonds to keep them firm in their commitments.
Yeah, look, I think DeSean Womack is a guy who, out of everyone they have committed, they have 22 kids committed right now, Billy. And I think if you're going up and down the list, there will be a lot of guys who play early. But if you're looking for the Will Campbell, Emory Jones, Harold Perkins, like Mason Taylor, the guy who is going to come in and play right away, I think Womack, for me, is number one on the list. I think they lose a couple of D linemen. Ojulari will be gone. Gay will be gone. You'll start to kind of shift the D-line around a little bit with the return of Mason Smith. We'll see what Jaquelin Roy does. But my point being, Jamar Cain's going to be moving some current pieces he has. He's going to be welcoming in a new class. And he's got, 3 top 50 guys? So, I mean, guys like Duron Reed in the middle or as a defensive lineman, Womack as an edge rusher. I think they'll play early. But we've talked about it on the pod before. I think you've agreed. Womack, for me, number one on the list. I won't be surprised if he starts in the season opener.
Yeah, wouldn't shock me either. Looking forward to seeing Duron Reed. You mentioned him next week. Hopefully he's back for Carver, and I get to see him in Atlanta. If not, we'll shift some plans around and see who I go out and see that Thursday night in Atlanta. If you're in or around Atlanta, let me know. Maybe we grab lunch, little subscriber hangout. We can work something up. So, look, we kind of keep the train moving. 3 LSU DB commits at this point that I have heard are expected back in Baton Rouge this weekend. Let's lead off with one that I think is important that we touch on because we have gotten some questions about him on the board. and that's Dalen Austin, the 4-star defensive back out of California. He's somebody that is pretty quiet when it comes to recruiting. He's very difficult to honestly get in touch with just in general. College coaches have kind of shared that from multiple schools with his folks even. They kind of go through them and hope that they can chat with Dalen here and there. Oregon has not let up its push. Now he's set to be back in Baton Rouge. That's a big deal for LSU.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Oregon, and he's got connections there, whether it's high school or former teammates being on the roster there in the commitment group. So I would keep an eye on the Ducks, but more so for me, Billy, like if you're recruiting around the country, which they are in this class. I mean, Womack's a kid out of the DC area. They've got or Baltimore, I guess. They've got kind of kids all over the map. Minnesota, Jackson Howard, but Las Vegas, Jeremiah Hughes. I look at Austin being from California, and I think, okay, almost never does LSU get anyone from California, and they haven't really tried at any like high rate. Like even when Coach O was here, he coached at Southern Cal. Like he had ties into LA, and they were recruiting kids, but either never really got into it, and certainly never far enough to have a commitment. So getting Austin committed, I thought was big, but holding him, I thought was the bigger thing. Like to be able to get through signing day, get him onto campus because I don't know. We'd have to go look. I can't remember the last time LSU had a California kid on roster. It might have been Hayden Reddick at quarterback many moons
Eli
ago.
Ricks.
That's right. That doesn't count for me as an IMG guy?
No, it counts. He was at Modern Day when he committed and then transferred. Come on. Like that one's got to count.
So.
And then his family moved to Baton Rouge.
And his family moved to Baton Rouge.
So
and he doesn't play for LSU anymore, and he plays for Bama. So I don't know how much that worked out for you.
He's a guy that got out of Louisiana and went to Alabama. Add him to the list. Anyway, Jeremiah Hughes will also be back in town. He's back on the field. I see what you did there, Shea, with the adjustable chair.
That was just some in-game adjustment. That's what everybody wants out of their coaches. I'm just giving it in-game adjustments.
Jeremiah Hughes back on campus. He's back on the field for Bishop Gorman after sitting out a couple of weeks, letting his knee rest up. He's ready for playoffs for Gorman, and then Ashton Stamps, who we just had an update on as well. And he just released his midseason senior tape. Really impressive, Shea. So that group at the very least, and there probably going to be others, but that group I heard is going to be back in Baton Rouge. And I know you and I are both high on Ashton Stamps.
Yeah, I love Ashton Stamps. And I think almost nearly all the time, not every time, but most of the time across LSU's really past couple of decades of recruiting Rummel, when you've hit on those kids, even walk-ons. I mean, a lot of their better players have come out of Rummel. And I think Stamps is next in line. We saw him at Camp Billy. He went to every camp until he earned his offer. He's really dialed up things as a senior. Peter Rauderkus went out there from our site and watched him play and caught up with his head coach. And that article's on our site now at the Bengal Tiger. But his coach talks about just the physicality being there that maybe he lacked in years past. And you watch him on film, some people already kind of comped him to Jay Ward in the sense of a kid who's leaving high school and can play safety, corner, nickel. He's got some real versatility to his game. I think on the On3 consensus, which averages out everybody, right, Billy, he's their lowest ranked commitment. I think he's actually one of their better commitments. So I think by the time senior years are done, evaluation processes are complete, he'll be one guy in the class that you look back on and think, man, look, at a position of need, which is anywhere in the defensive backfield right now, that was a big one for him.
Yeah, I think he's going to be able to find his way on the field early on because of that versatility as well. He's shown it. You and I talk to people all the time. Some people, for the most part, are saying he's a corner to start out for us, but don't be surprised if he plays safety. He's just got that versatility to his game. He was recruited at safety this summer. Kind of flipped him to corner with seeing some of his tape. They just feel like they got a really good football player in him, and I agree. So you've got those guys. Look, we talked about Dalen Austin. Julian Sayin is visiting Alabama, the 4-star quarterback who LSU is hot on. He's visiting Alabama this weekend. LSU trying to get the California thing going like I requested early this summer early this fall from Brian Kelly. I said I'd like to keep going out to California every year to see somebody, so if they can get Julian Sayin, that keeps that rolling. That keeps me a Brian Kelly fan for sure. Look, now, one name I think in the secondary that is coming to town this weekend that's going to stick out in a big way, Isaac Smith out of the state of Mississippi, a 4-star prospect. You've got Ole Miss, you've got Mississippi State gunning for him. LSU entered the mix with him with an offer. Texas A&M is lurking. This guy just seems like he has all the options late in the game for his recruitment, and he's very much uncommitted and taking these visits and seeing how things look to him when he's ready to make his decision.
Yeah, look, this is kind of where things stand right now, Billy. I'll go over their DB room, which actually really does need to be boosted in a big way through this class and maybe again through the portal, just because they don't have a lot of numbers. But we talked about Ashton Stamps. If you say at least he may start out as a corner, you would have him, Dalen Austin out of California. We've talked about him, and Jeremiah Hughes, who we just talked about as well, out of Las Vegas. So you got 3 corners committed. Michael Doherty coming out of Grayson has been really one of their first commitments. He might have been their first or second, but he was in that very early group that committed in the fall. He's thought of as kind of a nickel. And then Billy at safety, you've got Ryan Yates, who out of Texas publicly doubled down on his commitment this week. He put out even a graphic saying, "I'm fully committed." I guess that comes in the wake of other schools recruiting him. Really, Oklahoma's been a school that's been talked about of if he shows up on visits or doesn't. But he seems locked in. And then your other guys, Kylan Jackson out of Zachary here in Baton Rouge, who is a high 4-star player. So 3 corners, a nickel, 2 safeties. You kind of have needs everywhere. I think that's kind of what makes Isaac Smith intriguing. That would be a third safety, a third pure safety. Obviously, a lot of these guys have versatility, like you talked about with Stamps, but everybody seems to want him right now late in the game. LSU's making their push, getting him to campus. Obviously, this weekend's big. You gets to see them play an in-state school in Ole Miss, so you'd like to be able to beat them because they're a school like State, very heavily involved. But we say this about once a year, or at least we start to say it once a year, and remind people, Billy, it's tough to recruit Louisiana. Like Bama's one of the only schools that's come into Louisiana and taken guys that were really at the very top of LSU's board. Now, other schools, TCU being one of them for a long time, has made good evals and ended up getting good kids out of Louisiana. But it's been Bama, and it hasn't been Georgia comes in every year and it can take kids, or Florida, or anyone, A&M, even with the arrival of Jimbo Fisher. You look at Mississippi, even Bama has trouble getting into Mississippi. Like when LSU got Deion Smith, the number 1 player out of Mississippi, that was a massive deal. Now, granted, he left campus after a year. He went back to JUCO in Mississippi and is trying to get back potentially with Ole Miss. But it drives home the reality. It is really hard to get those kids right now late in the game. Isaac Smith seems like a guy State really wants, Ole Miss really wants. And you have to see if you're an LSU, can you end up getting him into the class? I think that will be one to watch, but with some reserved kind of hesitancy of knowing, all right, both in-state schools really want him, and now we're in the NIL era. Does that make it even tougher to get Mississippi kids? I don't know. It'll be worth monitoring, but yes, they want him, and yes, he'd be a take at any point, and he'll be on campus this weekend.
Well, yeah, and then another thing in terms of they're in it, but also reserves. He's a Louisiana bootlegger, but again, he's from Mississippi. I mean, the last Louisiana bootlegger off the top of my head from Mississippi ended up being Kamari Rogers, who they backed off of in the end, and he ended up going elsewhere. But it's just kind of one of those wild things. There's ties, there's things that make sense. Can they do it? Can they pull it off? It's another story. We'll continue to monitor him, but he's very interested. Seemed to really like Kerry Cooks when they extended the offer to him. So we'll see how the visit goes. It's an unofficial visit, so if he takes his recruitment kind of the whole way, they could get him back in December potentially. That's a good thing to know with Isaac Smith as well. So we're going to touch on some other visitors on the BengalTiger.com. We'll have that for you. Again, $1 for a year. Just sign up. I mean, you'll get all the official visitors, and you'll get through, early signing day and all of that, all the scoop.
And regular signing day and the whole off season. Yes, it's $1, guys. Come on now. That's where we're putting all the scoop anyhow. Here we're just rapping about the scoop.
Yeah.
That's where we actually answer the questions.
So we've got that visitor list coming on the BengalTiger.com. Check it out. Right now, though, we're going to kind of shift gears and go a little bit to one of my favorite discussions always on the board, something that certainly drives discussion and passionate discussion, and that's the rankings. The updated 2024 On 300 is out. Shea, is this the part of the
I
podcast
hate
where like
rankings
I go
day.
on a rant and you just kind of like shut it down?
Yeah, no, I don't love rankings day like you. I don't want everybody out there arguing. But hey, it wasn't that one. We're not at the end of the cycle. This week's for 2024. So juniors midway through their junior year, obviously. And we talked a good bit about it on the board. We broke down kind of where Louisiana's at, where it might be trending. But one guy of note, Billy, Julian Sayin moved up in the overall rankings. So among quarterbacks, so I think he was sixth, and now he's fourth. With Dylan Raiola, who's committed to Ohio State, who's been the number one prospect overall, quarterback wise. And he's in there with DJ Lagway and Ryan Puglisi. Puglisi just committed to Georgia. And obviously, Lagway's uncommitted. He's a guy LSU's had on their campus a bunch and has been recruiting. But you mentioned earlier, Sayin visits Bama this weekend. Then at any point, really, he's going to be announcing his decision. Again, only a junior in high school, but dominoes are starting to fall. Look, Puglisi committed to Georgia. He was on Georgia's short list of quarterbacks they liked. But now we see, look, Bama's going to host him. I think it'll be interesting to watch what Bama really does here because, yes, they like Julian Sayin, and yes, they're recruiting Lagway and a couple of other guys out there. But they've also got a 2 quarterback class right now, including a Baton Rouge kid, Eli Holstein. Then what's his name out of Georgia, the pitcher that's committed?
Dylan Lonergan.
Dylan Lonergan, 2 4-star top, 300 players committed to the Tide. Do they want to get those guys to the finish line at early signing day before, then you take a quarterback for the next year? You hope that those 2 guys, it doesn't affect their commitment anyway. But we'll see what happens there with Bama. But Billy, you and I both believe and have maintained that Sayin's done his homework. I think he sees LSU's prioritized him. Joe Sloan's done a great job here as the quarterback's coach and primary recruiter at that position. And LSU might not be far off from a commitment from a guy on the On3 consensus. We talked about the On3 rankings having it number 4. The On3 consensus has it number 2 overall quarterback in the country behind Ohio State's commitment, Raiola. Pretty big way to start the class, as Birkenstock had said on the board today. If you can, we're talking about 24. So they have 5 commitments for next year. If you can pop in a quarterback at that level, Billy, I just got on my California rant earlier about how they can never get to California kids. And here they go in back-to-back classes, potentially getting them. If you get a quarterback like that, does it then bleed into the rest of your class? I would say yes. That's how you attract the big-time talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of quarterbacks that they just get into you see some flips here and there, right? But rarely do you kind of see a name brand program getting somebody on board and then them flipping. Like,
Right.
any of these programs that have won a national championship in the 2000s or even the 90s, if you get your quarterback on board, you got them, and there's a very slim chance of them flipping for the most part. And they become an extension of the coaching staff, which is very important. They become a leader. There are, a few leaders in that class of 24 already. Maurice Williams, who rose up a good bit in the rankings. JoJo Stone, who rose up a good bit in the rankings. That whole class is just honestly really tight. The 2024 class, Zion Ferguson, Xavier Atkins, we talked about them last week, really bonding over that visit when they were in town for the Tennessee game after the game. This class, if they get Julian Sayin, it has a chance to really take off. So he moves up in the overall quarterback ranking, stays exactly the same overall in terms of his, number 47 overall ranking in the country. That's a good sign, and I think it's well deserved. There were a couple guys ahead of him that needed to maybe trim back a little bit, and they did. Now you look at him and look, if Duron Reed can't go on Thursday night, I mean, Carlsbad plays next Thursday. Maybe I'm flying coast to coast, but they also have some other rankings that we updated in that class for some of these LSU commits, and some of them, are probably a little bit of a hot button. Tavion Galloway drops out of the On 300 from number 160. He's a guy that we saw, multiple times really over the course of the last 6 months or so. And you just kind of got the feeling that you want to see more from him athletically. But on the flip side of things, Shea, if they get some of these guys that broke into the On 300 in Louisiana, especially, Wardell Mack moved up, who's the John Eric corner. He's now a top 80 overall prospect. Jawan Johnson is now in the On300 as the state's number 2 prospect, 117th overall. Those are really important prospects to land and start building that momentum in state for 2024, because 2024 could be a really interesting cycle for LSU. We talk about it every year with them evaluating the state, finding some of the guys late. They are really going to have to, I think, turn over some stones. We know they'll find some guys, but look, they've offered more 2025 running backs at this point than they have in all of 2024, and none of them come from Louisiana so far. That's just kind of to give you a snapshot of the state in 2024 right now with where it stands. It's just kind of a hard state to see that many LSU dudes, even though I'm sure they will come up at some point.
Yeah, I think they'll emerge. I mean, it won't be top heavy like it has been in recent years. Like this year, Arch Manning, Derek Williams, Zaylon's Hurd, Shelton Sampson, like you're going multiple 5-stars deep. I don't think we're going to see that, but we'll see it flesh out to the point where, they'll have 10, 11, 12 guys out there that are highly ranked, top 200, 250, 300 level guys that LSU's either offered or kind of recruiting and monitoring. So just midway through junior seasons, excuse me, right now, doesn't really concern me. Look, they're going to have to always lean heavy on Louisiana, and because of that, you want the state to give you a ton every year, so almost it defaults into an excellent class for you. And then you say, look, maybe looking at next year, they have to do a little bit more work, a little bit more digging, but typically the cream of the crop rises in Louisiana. We find out who those top guys are, and I think it all fleshes itself out to be the same. So the focus for me right now would be kind of these senior year evaluations. I mean, there's guys around the state right now that could be on the cusp of getting an offer. Everyone's past the midway point of the year now. You're working towards November and then the playoffs. So I think with early signing day approaching, for me, one of the storylines is 22 commitments, which they did a great job here. Like we talked about the Tennessee game, they lost, and it's not the end of the world for recruiting because recruits aren't going to pay attention to like the highs and lows of it all. The point remains the same after they go on the road and have a huge program win over Florida. You don't roll off a bunch of commits next week. I think a big part of that has been they haven't had any commits since the season started. It was convince everybody to get into the class, load them all up, all the in-state kids and your big out-of-state targets. And we heard him say it, Billy. Every one of these recruits said the coaches told us this offseason not to expect the LSU that's going to be here when you're here, right? Like, we're going to have our struggles. We're rebuilding this from the ground up. We need you to be a part of that in year 2. But this year, don't let our win-loss record deter you from where we're going. Now at 5-2, it doesn't seem terrible at all, does it? But I think that it's allowed them to now focus on football. The core of the class is done. Then evaluate these seniors in Louisiana and around the country, but press for the big names left. We talked about Isaac Smith out of Mississippi. There's Toviano in Texas. Harbor coming out of the DC area, a guy taking an official visit in December as a 5-star. DJ Chester on the offensive line. There's guys still out there that they're in the thick of it with. They're going to be recruiting till the end. But the fact that they've been able to focus on football and not have to every game have official visitors and rely on kind of swaying kids on those weekends, I think has been really key for them.
Yeah, and I think that's 100% right. And another thing too, it kind of comes to mind. Look, I mean, COVID 2020, all these guys that are in that class of 2024, they're freshmen in high school. How you wonder kind of how much that actually affected, maybe their development early on. They missed that freshman year, that first intro to high school. Louisiana kind of impacted even in 2021. Now, maybe we see some of these guys emerge late as maybe late bloomers just because they didn't get that stage that some of these guys have had, like a Harlem Berry in 2025. He breaks out this year or last year, really, and is able to dominate and show what he can do and continue that this year. Now he's on the radar. He's got a chance to be a 5-star in my mind in the class of 2025. Now you kind of look at another prospect who rose up the rankings, and we'll kind of close out with him, I would say, and make a couple quick notes here on a couple others. But Sterling Dixon, who LSU leads for, or just barely trails Auburn in the On3 recruiting prediction machine, I believe. Still just trails Auburn. But the latest prediction is for LSU with his recruitment from Sam Spiegelman. He's set to announce on December 1st, Auburn, Alabama, and LSU battling it out, really, for Sterling Dixon out of Mobile Christian. He makes the move from edge to linebacker in our rankings. And I watched the tape. I just feel like he's still an edge guy, still a little, maybe raw in coverage. Just with his frame, I think I see him adding more weight and being somebody that, plays a little bit more in that box off that edge. And I think that's where LSU is recruiting him for the most part. But he rose all the way up from about 246, I think, to the number 60th overall prospect in the country.
And he has he has an announcement date set, late November or early December? It's one of the two.
December 1st.
December 1st. A 24 prospect. Again, you'll have to hold on to him for a whole year if you do go into Mobile, the Mobile area in Alabama to get him, because Bama and Auburn are his other top schools. But I think LSU's got a good shot here to land that initial commitment. And I think it's a testament to what Jamar Cain can do on the recruiting trail. We've seen it in this current class. We're seeing it in the next year's class with him getting a lot of defensive linemen and edge rushers onto campus for visits, which then puts you in a position like this to ultimately land an early commitment. We don't have picks in. I don't, at least. Do you?
Nope.
No, not yet. A little risky on a Bama kid who's wanted by Bama and Auburn, but we'll see in a month's time, a little more than a month, what he ends up doing. But overall, Billy, it's a good LSU sitting pretty in recruiting with the latest ranking shuffle in the industry for the 23 class. So these are the seniors who are going to be on the team next year. They do have a top 5 class now. They moved up from 6 to 5. So number 5 class, 22 commits. We think they take around 28, 29. If the right guys say yes down the stretch, and we'll see it if they hand out new offers. But that's about as good as you can ask for. I think right now as a program, you're sitting pretty. You're 5-2 on the field. Vegas thought you'd win about 7 games. You're trending in the right direction there. You've got a top 5 class. You're trending in the right direction there. Things are moving well for LSU right now.
Absolutely, there sure are. And let me quick hit for you guys a few notable prospects in the 2024 class that moved up. Duncanville, Texas, edge Colin Simmons, now number 11th overall, up from number 38. So he's a 5-star prospect, and I think that's right on the money. He was awesome the few times I've seen him play this year. Waco, Texas Connolly DB, Kobe Black up into number 16 from number 28. LSU's really high on him. We dropped some intel on him on the site last week. Zena Umezulu, who I'm going to see, big target for Jamar Cain out of Allen, Texas. I'm going to see him play on Thursday when they take on Denton Guyer with Ryan Yates. He's up inside the top 100 even farther. Kamarian Franklin, a defensive lineman out of Mississippi, 4-star target for the Tigers, up 9 spots to number 52 overall. Charleston Collins out of Arkansas moves up number 235 to number 133. And those are really the big ones outside of Jalen Crawford, who moves up 67 spots to number 200 overall. He was a guy that was on campus as well for that Tennessee game and is a big target too for LSU.
Almost every guy you mentioned there has already visited LSU for a game this year, if not every single one of them.
And has been on campus multiple times. I'm pretty sure Kamari by the end of the season,
done a good job with that, of
they
getting
have done a
kids for
terrific job.
Not just this class, but next year. As this is a perfect example. You go list off the guys who just became some unranked or outside the top 300 or were lower ranked, whatever it might have been. These weren't all guys who were just sitting in the top 50 and they're like, hey, let's get these guys onto campus because they're highly ranked. These were good evals, good offers. They got them to campus multiple times, and now we're looking at midseason, and 5-6 guys you listed just then are top 100 players.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're seeing it kind of hit, all right, spring, get them in for summer, hope they camp, maybe not. They've got the Bayou Splash thing they do. We'll see how the recruiting calendar all works out in the future, how that changes things. But they're kind of, every single time you kind of say, that guy hasn't been here in a minute, it's almost like he pops up. Like Kamarian Franklin, going to be one of the guys that visits for the Ole Miss game this weekend as of now. It was kind of like, it's about that time he should be hitting Baton Rouge. And sure enough, out of that group, I think I listed off, he was the one that hadn't visited for a game yet this year. So good on the staff. They've got a really good organized effort to get these guys on campus a good bit, and they've done that. So Shea, we've gone on over 30 minutes now. Guys, we hope you enjoyed this edition of the podcast. Please keep subscribing to thebengaltiger.com for $1
It's
for
a
a
dollar.
year.
It's a dollar. Come on, guys.
It's $1.
It's a dollar.
It's $1. Tell all your friends and subscribe to the YouTube page. Just hit that like button. If you listen to the podcast, if you watch the podcast and don't subscribe to the YouTube page, please subscribe to it. We need your help on that front. And also subscribe to wherever else you actually listen to the podcast. So for Shea Dixon, I'm Billy Embody. Another big recruiting weekend ahead for LSU, which means another big weekend on thebengaltiger.com. So we'll catch you guys next week with another edition of the Bengal Tiger Recruiting Podcast. Appreciate you guys listening and stopping in.